our first session today, we're going to take a closer look at some winning strategies to help keep employees safe in the face of growing aggression and violence in the retail workplace. Gethin Nadin is an award-winning psychologist who has been helping some of the world's largest organizations to improve their employee experience and well-being for more than 2 decades. The last 11 years have been spent working as part of the senior leadership team at Benefex, where Gethin leads human resources, employee experience, and employee well-being through leadership as Chief Innovation Officer. Gethin, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
We're really excited about today's session, Gethin. We appreciate your time today, and we're really excited to have you here. I know it's across the pond, and I know it's a little bit later there, so we really want to thank you for extending your day, and we'll let you go at it.
Excellent, thank you very much. So hello, everybody. So I'm coming to you live from central London, which is why it's a bit dark. This is a hotel room. I don't have the luxury of portal windows in my own home, although maybe one day. So what I'm going to talk about in this session today is we're going to take a closer look at some of the winning strategies to help keep employees safe in the face of growing aggression and violence in the retail workplace. And so I'm going to talk about the need for every customer-facing team to be more aware of the ways increased customer aggression is affecting its employees and the result of inaction. And I'll also talk about some of the swift actions across that the people like the UK government have taken since the start of the pandemic to protect workers from customer aggression and where some of the decisions may benefit employers in retail in the US. But I think it's obvious for retailers struggling to attract and retain employees, understanding some of those best ways to support employee well-being plays a large part in how we're going to retain quality talent this year. And nowhere is this more pronounced than in retail, hospitality, and the service sectors, all of those industries that have struggled to retain and attract people since the start of the pandemic 3 years ago. A little bit more about me. So hopefully this starts to tell you a little bit about why I'm here, and what I've got to say is hopefully worth listening to, but I guess you'll be the judge by the end of this talk. I'm an award-winning psychologist, 2 times best-selling HR author, and a well-being author. I've been working around the employee experience and employee well-being industries for the last 2 decades. And as mentioned during the introduction, the last 11 of those as Chief Innovation Officer for Benefex, the global employee benefits and employee experience technology business. I recently completed a lot of work on mental health. So I completed a little tour with Ruby Wax, an American who's very famous in the UK. I don't think it's as famous in America. And I've also been shortlisted for UK Mental Health Campaign of the Year. So really passionate about making a difference to employees that in turn makes a difference to business. And quoted in hopefully some magazines and publications that you'll recognize. I guess the one logo to add to this now is Loss Prevention magazine. So we will make sure that logo gets added to that. And also my most recent book is called A Work in Progress, Unlocking Wellbeing to Create More Sustainable and Resilient Organizations. Some of the research that I delve into will be from that book. That came out 3 months ago, went straight onto the Amazon bestseller chart in the UK, but is available on Amazon throughout North America, Canada, and 12 other countries. So you can see that, and we've got some information. I think the Loss Prevention magazine are going to be giving some copies of that away. So keep your eyes peeled over the next hour or so for that. And just a little bit about Benefex, the company I work for, as well as all the many other things I do as Chief Innovation Officer at Benefex. You know, we are an employee experience, benefits, and wellbeing technology company. We're working with many US employers at the moment on the benefit and wellbeing strategies. We have people working out of Florida. We just opened an office in Chicago, and we'd love to share more about what we do with anyone who'd like to have a chat with us afterwards. And we work with hundreds of global customers and have almost 2 million people using our technology. So some of the likes of Salesforce, Sony, Mondelez International, Budweiser, Virgin Atlantic, Deliveroo, and many, many more. But as a workplace well-being expert, I first started writing about the impact customer aggression had on the employee experience back in 2020, just as the pandemic started to take hold. And I was really interested in learning about how this increase in aggression was going to impact employee well-being. And one of the things that we knew very early on during the first lockdown was that forcing people away from their family, friends, and colleagues, and removing the ways in which they de-stress from life was going to have a significant impact on their mental health. And we know that from the research conducted in parts of Asia during the SARS epidemic almost 20 years ago, when you lock people down, they start to display symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Between 2018 and 2020, according to the FBI, assaults in grocery stores in America rose by about 63%, and those in convenience stores by about 75%. That's compared with an overall 42% rise in assaults over the same period. So of the more than 2 million assaults reported to the FBI by law enforcement agencies across the US in 2020, about 4% of those were at shopping malls, convenience stores, and other similar locations. So there's a big imbalance here where actually quite a lot of those acts of aggression and those assaults are taking place in retail locations. And during the pandemic, it was a pretty regular occurrence to see a video shared online of a customer attacking staff in retail environments, mostly as associates tried to enforce things like pandemic rules like mask wearing and social distancing. But none of this is unique to US retail. In the UK, one of our largest grocery chains is called Co-op, and that reported 133 cases of abuse by customers directed at shop staff in just one day during the first lockdown in the UK. And the situation in the UK quickly got so bad that research by one of our biggest retail unions found that 1 in 6 employees working in retail said they suffer abuse from customers on a daily basis. So threats to cough and spit at staff became a regular feature of being a key worker during the pandemic. One of our biggest retail unions found that 61% of employees working in retail said that verbal abuse during the pandemic and threats by customers, these were everyday occurrences. But again, this wasn't just unique to the UK and the US. According to one study carried out by UNI Global Union, the Federation of Worldwide Unions, the pandemic led to a global rise in violence in retail stores. So the study found that while violence towards those working in retail was not unheard of prior to the pandemic, it certainly doubled during this time, with a remarkable 9 out of 10 retail workers globally saying that they'd been victims of abuse from customers. And these were the same people we called key workers. We began to value these people in a way we probably never did before. And now we find out that we're kind of leaving these people to be exposed to some of the worst traits of humanity. But one thing that's obvious from all the work I've been doing over the last couple of years right across the world is that well-being is dominating the modern employee business and the employee experience. At Benefex, we surveyed employees and employers across the world, and 99% of those told us that employee well-being was a top priority for them. And when we crunched the numbers of all the benefits chosen in the 50 plus countries that we operate in, we found that 8 out of the top 10 benefits were all related to well-being. But most importantly, our research last year found that a massive 92% of employees across the world and across industries say that the way an organization commits to employee well-being is now the most important factor when deciding to move to a new employer. And I think that's pretty huge and quite significant. And we're also seeing that the role of employee well-being is playing in environmental, social, and governance issues. So while almost every organization is making pretty significant moves towards becoming more sustainable, it does appear that the social side of ESG is proving pretty difficult for most organizations to grasp, especially at a time when societal and consumer demand is saying that employers, especially in retail, have to act more quickly to support people. And that elusive S in ESG is generally about the way that we treat and care for our people at work. So this is really relevant to people's experience of customer aggression, because how are we creating safe spaces? How do we build cultures and manage the people that work for us? How do we directly support their health and well-being? And how do we make sure that everybody is safe and included? And we won't get ESG right without committing to taking better care of our people. And I think this is so strong. I think the employer's influence on many of these ESG issues is so strong that HR teams, human resources teams, and employers as a whole have the ability to directly influence and change 9 of the UN's 17 sustainability goals. So pretty significant again. But it's clear that we are where we need to be. As we found out today, we're squeezing our people, we're leaving them open to abuse and not supporting them in the right way, and we're not taking care of their well-being. In this graph, you'll see a spike that represents when the pandemic took hold, a point in time when we started to do all the things we should have been doing as employers. We paid people bonuses, we paid them sick pay when historically employers didn't pay that in every state in the US. We thanked them regularly for their work as key workers. We told them we cared for them. Our leaders and our CEOs and our board of directors all told employees that we cared for them and the work they did was important. We checked in on them more and we spent more on well-being. But as the pandemic became a normal part of our lives, we stopped doing those things and most of us went back to believing our employer didn't care about us. So how do we fix this? I think first of all, we need to start looking at what might be causing this increased aggression that's impacting employee well-being. And I think embedded into the American retail landscape is this one of service to the customer, many times over anything else. So famous worldwide, especially in the UK, American businesses, American retailers put the customer first. But we think that maybe US retailers are falling foul of the way maybe we've treated customers historically. So with the aim to improve customer satisfaction and loyalty through this kind of customer first attitude, have we, and this is a question, historically required employees to maintain certain behaviors that put the customer and their needs first, and in many cases over and above those of the employees themselves? So have we created a situation where the buyer and the seller are not actually on equal footing? So in an attempt to maximize customer service, we have maybe inadvertently made self-centered customers who are putting their own needs and desires over those of the people that are serving them. And I also wonder whether this is part of the situation is also part of a byproduct of how we run modern retail. So we know that thin staff and automation might be making it easier for people to commit crimes and for those types of people and aggression to flourish in retail locations. We know that in order to reduce incarceration rates, punishment for retail staff have eased in the retail staff have eased in the US. And as I'm sure already know, many states now have a felony threshold of about $1,000 or more before they get taken seriously by police. And also is the way that we treat customers kind of far too relaxed and enabling these acts of aggression to become commonplace. But what we're starting to see is that as the pandemic subsides, this tension still persists. So in life, when we experience aggression, our fear, our fight or flight action kind of kicks in, and we usually fight back against the threat, or we make a choice to run from it. But in a customer service environment, we've actually created an environment and created cultures that ensures our employees actually aren't able to do either one of those things. They can't fight back against customers and they can't run from customers either. And although the pandemic appears to be behind us, it's only a matter of time before another societal stressor puts enough pressure on the public to start acting aggressive again. And so we can almost forgive and understand some of the behaviors we saw during the pandemic because we were all pretty acutely aware of how people were struggling with lockdown. We know that stress was high and we lost many of our outlets, the way we decompress from stress. And so it was natural, I think, that customer aggression was going to start to increase. But like the pandemic, the cost of living crisis across Europe and the US and the UK is another pressure that's starting to squeeze people and making them act in a way they might not usually. 44% of employees experienced a lot of daily stress in the previous day, according to Gallup. While almost half of the world's workers felt the burden of stress, working women in the US and Canada are among the most stressed employees globally. And so again, we're starting to see that, there are lots of women working in retail. There are lots of women working retail in the US, and they're starting to become some of the most stressed people in our society. In the UK, violence against retail workers has started to increase again as the pandemic subsided, as a direct result of the public feeling the pressure of increased prices. And as you might have seen today, the International Monetary Fund has said that the UK is going to have one of the worst recessions of all the developed economies around the world. So we expect these figures to increase again as people feel more squeezed and stressed. Figures from the trade body, the Institute of Customer Service, revealed that 44% of frontline retail staff say they experienced hostility from customers in the past 6 months. And that's up by a quarter from those same figures last year. So again, we're starting to see this rising tension come back. And as those tensions continue to rise, in many countries, this is thought to be linked with things like declining consumer settlement amid the cost of living crisis. And if you know anything about the UK at the moment, we have a huge amount of strikes going on. There are strikes happening in France. And so as people are trying to react to these pressures that happen in society, it's inevitable that that's going to start to come out. But in places like Scotland, we've started to see violence targeted shop workers who are just trying to do things like enforce age restrictions on products. And so it seems like we might be in a situation for those in retail roles that maybe this kind of aggression and abuse might start to become normal. And that's really worrying. But the UK is acting. Many of our large grocery retailers have been lobbying government to do more and make it a very specific crime to attack a retail employee, so it's not just treated as another assault. And in April 2022, something called the Police Crime Sentencing in Courts Act was given royal assent in the UK. And what that means is from April last year, April 2022, as part of the Police Crime and Sentencing in Courts Act, common assault against anyone working in a retail environment is now classed as an aggravated offence, which carries tougher penalties. So if you assault somebody working in retail whilst they're trying to serve you, that will actually get a tougher penalty than if you just assaulted that person on the street for whatever reason. And these new stricter sentencing guidelines, we think, will provide vital protection for workers against this backdrop of heightened customer stress and frustration. So again, we're starting to see some action here, which may be something the US can start to learn from. But all of this inevitably has an impact on well-being, and that's why I'm here being the person to talk about this to you. So if we've seen, well-being is now a critical part of the employee experience for both employees and employers in almost every country, in almost every industry. So what is the impact of this increased customer aggression on well-being? If we're also keen on solving the well-being problem, but we have this very unique service-based issue that we're trying to solve, how do those two things work together? And I think we should probably note that it's not just retail workers who are suffering. Employees working in almost every customer-facing role are suffering increased abuse because of the pandemic. We saw things like in the Financial Ombudsman Service, which is a big kind of financial services regulated body that you can issue your complaints to. They received an influx of complaints from consumers in the wake of the pandemic. So they start to have more aggressive customers just in call centers, contact centers. And so it's not just retail, but I appreciate we're focusing really on retail for the sake of this presentation. And so the impact on employee well-being, the National Federation of Independent Retailers has seen growing reports of violence among independent retailers and even building societies in the UK. There's been a marked spike in abuse directed at staff working in branches of building societies and banks. And in May last year, the UK carried out research with almost 2,000 service workers and found that 8 of 10 of those surveyed said that their mental health had deteriorated based on the previous year, just as a result of the job they do. And so it's no surprise that this is going to affect their overall well-being too. And we have some academic evidence to back this up. A systematic review of 52 different scientific papers found that customer aggression impairs employee well-being. A separate analysis of more than 600 different surveys sent to customer-facing employees throughout China found that when they're exposed to customer aggression, employees are more likely to act aggressively towards their co-workers. And so that becomes the opposite of something we call in psychology the gain spiral. The gain spiral is something that happens when an employee has a great experience at work, gets on well with their co-workers, and feels safe and looked after by their employer. They go home and they report better relationships with their partners and children, and overall life satisfaction increases. So conversely, exposure to aggression and a poor work experience has been found to make an employee's home life worse. And a worse home life leads to worsening customer service and productivity at work. So we have a very clear vested interest in making sure our people avoid acts of aggression and negativity at work, because they will take that home, they'll bring it back to the work, and that will affect their work and productivity and obviously your business. But we also have to think about when we don't protect and support our people's well-being at work, when we aren't there for them when they experience customer aggression, we reduce something called the anxiety buffer. So this is a theory that links our self-esteem with the people around us. So in the context of what we're talking about today, the people we work with. And so those who manage us and work alongside us in a retail environment or service environment play a really big part in our well-being. So much so that our relationships with these people, our trust and the psychological safety we get from working with them can actually buffer us against developing poor mental health. So the more we can connect our people together, bring them together in a community, the better they will actually help each other deal with stress that can be caused by customers. At Benefex, we surveyed almost 7,000 people across the world. And aside from the 99% of employers telling us that employee well-being was a top priority, I just wanted to remind you of that massive 92% of employees who said that the way an organization commits to well-being is now the top reason why they would take a job. So your people want and expect you to look after them more than you ever have. And retail isn't immune from those changing expectations. We have to change the way we manage customer service employees and be better at being there for them. And so a huge shift in actions we've seen from retailers is just how they're offering pretty well-funded employee benefit schemes that were once just kept for white-collar workers in finance or professional services. At Benefex, we work with global retailers who are now offering levels of insurance and healthcare we've never seen before. In the 20 years I've been working in employee benefits, I've never seen such a huge shift as we have now. We work with some of the largest UK retailers who are now prioritizing the well-being of their people through the tools and the benefits that they offer. So we're seeing that insurance policies that give employees access to therapists and mental health specialists, or financial well-being initiatives that reduce the pressure of everyday lives, are being rolled out really commonly amongst UK retailers. We're also seeing that employee recognition schemes are being rolled out to retail and shop floor employees to help build that better culture of belonging, that better culture of kind of gratitude, that psychological safety, that community well-being, and create all those good things that sustain that really important sense of community at work so we can buffer people against poor mental health caused by customer aggression. And this is part, I think, of a bigger chance or an opportunity by retailers to make a more concerted effort to keep and attract the best people. One of the UK's biggest grocery chains, Lidl, has given their staff around 4 different pay rises in the last 18 months. Retailers are now having to be really competitive throughout the UK and Europe and focus on things like employee engagement and developing the employee experience, perhaps for the first time ever. But there are some further risks and probably less obvious risks to employers. Those aggrieved workers may bring discrimination claims if they believe, for example, that they've not been provided with sufficient support for what might prove to be mental health disabilities. Individuals could resign and bring a claim of constructive unfair dismissal if they think they haven't been provided with enough protection from aggressive customers. And there are obviously also implications from a health and safety perspective if workers feel like they've been put at risk. But the long-lasting mental health impact the pandemic will have on those working in customer service will be considerable. While many were forced to work during the pandemic, juggling their own concerns and anxieties, as well as those of their customers, others were made redundant, lost their jobs, had wages cut, or put on furlough. And so I don't think employers should underestimate the strain that their customer-facing employees have been under this year and last, and the help and support they require, not only as we enter one of the busiest times of the year for retail, but as we put increased pressure on people to help our businesses and the economy to recover. Prior to the pandemic, 38% of retail workers said that their job negatively impacted their mental health in the last 12 months. Since the pandemic started, more than half now say that coronavirus has made it even worse. And as a result, more than 70% of retail employees say that the pandemic was the most stressful period of their careers. And recent studies have found that when that customer service employee receives that heightened number of angry or abusive customers, it really does impact them psychologically and emotionally. Customer outbursts can be really damaging physiologically for employees. Ultimately, they can contribute to depression and even an elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. Other studies have found that when controlling for other factors that would lead a customer-facing worker to resign, like low pay, working hours, and working conditions, researchers have found a significant link between customer mistreatment and employee quit rates. And so we're starting to see that aggressive customers drive turnover and tension. The potential impact on staff turnover, if we look in the UK, 21% of British retail workers say they consider leaving the sector because of the challenges they faced over the last couple of years. But interestingly, the percentage considering a departure increased to 31% for those working for some of the biggest retailers in the UK at the moment. And with the cost of high staff turnover being something that retailers will want to avoid in an already difficult time for the industry, I think it's critical that employers take action to protect their people and their business. And so if we look at this graph, we can see the industries with the highest turnover and tension at the moment. And this graph is a couple of months old. So clothing, retail, fast food, specialty retail, hotels and leisure, restaurants, general retail, and grocery all feature really prominently on this list. And these are the same industries and areas that increased customer aggression is being seen. So while aggression itself might not be the only contributing factor, we know that for these industries, it is becoming harder to attract and retain people following the pandemic. The Great Resignation is continuing to affect blue collar and white collar sectors with equal force. And some of those hardest hit industries, apparel, retail, fast food, and specialty retail, employ the highest percentage of blue collar workers amongst all the industries that I've studied in preparation for this talk. But one of the main drivers of the Great Resignation is actually company culture. So people aren't walking towards great cultures, they're running away from bad ones. So leaving a bad culture is now the strongest predictor of attrition, 10 times more important than compensation in predicting turnover across every single industry. So we have to get this right. A recent survey by the Society for Human Resource Management found that 50% of workers identified that feeling safe in the work environment is a very important aspect of their job satisfaction. So we have to make our people feel safer in the retail environment. We have to make people feel like they're more cared of. We have to make sure that our customer-facing employees are protected against aggressive customers. not just for their own well-being, but for not just for our own well-being, but the success of our organization. So we can't afford to ignore this growing problem. And part of what every employer, not just those in retail or hospitality, are focused on at the moment is how do they create that safe space? So how do we create spaces where people can be themselves without fear of being marginalized? And this is part of, for every employee, they shouldn't have to come to work scared about what might happen to them that day. There are now countless examples of grocery stores all over the US in almost every state. Many of them have been gun crimes and hate crimes. There's been 536 gun incidents in US grocery stores since January 2020, and 186 people have now died from shootings in grocery stores in just the last 2 years. Walmart themselves have found 363 of those, resulting in 112 deaths. So creating safe spaces is critical to how do we support the lives of the people that we're working with and prioritize their well-being. So some pretty high-level tips. We need to put policies in place. We need to tell employees what we consider aggressive or violent behavior, especially if that abuse is targeted to somebody because of their diversity. We need to train our people with dealing with difficult people so we can make sure that people don't, if they can control it, the situation doesn't escalate. Importantly, we need to provide resources to those who are struggling with the effects of abuse at work. So things like access to counselors, somebody to speak to, ways to help them calm down after an incident. We need to provide your people an opportunity to talk about what they've been involved in and what they've seen. We also need to make sure there's a clear pathway and process to involve senior management as soon as an incident arises, and a very clear follow-up process. So we're checking in on those people on a regular basis. We're not just dealing with the incident and walking away. We also need to make sure we involve our people in how we develop this support, so they actually have a say in what support you might offer. Frequent communication is going to be really key as well. And customer aggression comes in many forms, including things like cyberbullying. So if you have people that use chatbots, if you have people that are answering customer queries via email or chat, whatever that might be, that's where aggression can manifest as well. But most importantly, we need to be there for our people. I think the way that you care for your people will play a much bigger part in your success than it ever has before. But they have to believe that you care, and they have to actually see you caring. So the way you support and respond is going to play a huge part in how much your people trust you as an employer. And that trust will underpin an awful lot of their performance. And I just wanted to reiterate, 536 gun incidents in US grocery stores is pretty huge. We don't have this problem in the UK. And I know that some of the big players in the US, like Walmart, those figures are bigger just because of the prevalence of those stores. But I think it's really important for us to note that people are afraid to come to work in some retail environments where that's just never been happening before. And so a few lessons from the UK. I think the social context of employee versus customer doesn't allow for any sanctions on the customer and their behavior. So we kind of need to step up and create those ourselves. So following some recommendations made in the UK's Home Office Affairs Select Committee on violence and abuse towards retail workers, the Home Office in the UK agreed to consult with members of the National Retail Crime Steering Group in the UK about whether they would support the creation of an employer's charter. And that framework has been produced, and that framework acts as a template which can be used by UK retailers to demonstrate how they'll support their employees to prevent violence and abuse in retail settings, and then to support those employees who experience that behaviour. So following the learnings from the UK's National Business Crime Centre, which have recently been updated following those changes in UK law I mentioned earlier on, there are some bits of advice that kind of mirror slightly the advice that I've already given. But we need to provide support to employees that experience violence, abuse, or harassment at work, giving access to counsellors and the people they can speak to. Many of the support services available through employee benefit schemes can be used to provide access to the tools and resources to help those people that are struggling. And wellbeing acts like those that we offer at Benefits can help people to recover from stress and manage conflict and be supportive to their colleagues. We also need to think about how technology can better protect employees. So better investment in things like security cameras and body-worn cameras. There's some really interesting study about how body-worn cameras are really helping to give people this sense of safety and security that is missing from most of those experiences. Making sure we have a whistleblowing policy that allows employees to safely raise concerns about how you look after your staff without fear of retribution. We need everyone to be honest with us to be able to raise those safety concerns. We should be offering training to staff on how to manage situations that can potentially get violent. There are some really good examples of training videos on the National Business Crime Center website that are free to access, even if you're in the US. And I know many of you are doing this as well, but setting up crime reduction partnerships in your different locations and making sure that customers are aware that you have policies on aggression towards staff. I'm sure lots of retail environments have started to see posters going up saying we won't tolerate this behavior from customers. And that kind of stuff is really important. Even if it doesn't change the customer behavior, it sends this message out to your people that you're doing something and that you care about them. And lastly, we need to make sure that all instances of violence are reported to the appropriate authorities to be able to stamp out this pretty ubiquitous behavior at the moment. But I genuinely believe that social upheaval will continue to drive the employee experience. The power shift we're seeing between employee and employer is changing these historic systems and how we care for people. And societal events like the pandemic and a recession will impact the decisions we have to make to take better care of our people. And millions of employees working in retail have much higher expectations of what their employer is there for and how we should interact with them. And this newfound sense of influence, which most employees have, mean we must take their well-being concerns and expectations seriously. And so we move away from this idea of not doing any harm to our people to do better. So we have to ensure that the employee isn't worse off just because they decided to work for you. And that means protecting them against the dangers that exist, like aggressive behaviors and from customers. So very quickly, just before I finish, hot off the press, the latest Future of Retail Workforce study by Lotus Blue Consulting. This was out 4 days ago. 65% of retail employees intend to stay at their current employer this year. So just 65%. If we take pay out of the equation, among those who intend to stay, they say a comfortable working environment ranks as the top reason why they want to stay with their current employer in retail. And among those who say they intend to leave, a stressful job environment is the top reason why they say they want to leave. And the study confirms that if we want the best people to work with us in retail and stay with us, we have to remove that stress from the job and give better well-being support. I truly believe that employers have the ability to make the changes where the government and the state isn't anymore. I think every one of you listening here has the power to create cultures and workplaces that care for and support people. And while they and your community benefit from that, you do too. You will attract the best people who work harder, are more innovative, and deliver better customer service. And that way you will attract more loyal customers. And obviously all of this brings in more money. So the book is out now. I think we're going to talk slightly about the book. I'll be grateful if you wanted to buy it or if you wanted to connect on social. I share lots of this research, but really appreciate you listening. I think I might have gone over by a little bit, so apologies, and hope that was interesting. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Gethin, and you're fine because we started a couple minutes late too, so we're going to probably wind up going a little late today anyway. So no worries there at all. And thank you so much for that. I think one of your slides really summed it up there too about the impact, and you and I talked about this previously in planning for this. The impact on the employee, not only in the workplace, but it's what they take home too, and the impact that you're having on family lives, the impact that you're having on the communities. And that focus has to be there in the workplace in order to ensure that we're not carrying that through to a negative influence, not only while you're at work, but negative influence now in your family, negative influence on the community.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because if a part of everyone listening to this call today and everyone who's dialed in, your own well-being relies quite heavily on your own purpose and the purpose you get in life, whether that's inside or outside of work. And when we look at the data that's emerging, if you take neighborhoods that have employees that are happy at work and feel safe and secure at work, the whole neighborhood, the whole community gets better. People start acting in a different way when work is not a problem for them. And so we can start to see that the decisions everyone listening today make are actually making better society. So if you want your own purpose and you can follow those threads through, we know that if a father is supported at work, emotionally supported at work because of the things they go through, they have such a better relationship with their children. And so I don't know what's a greater purpose than if you can help parents have a better relationship with their kids. And we have some really interesting new research that shows that in turn makes sure that those kids have better mental health growing up. So when the parents are less anxious, less stressed, less overworked, less frightened about work, their kids start to become less likely to develop poor mental health. So we break this chain of some of the ways that mental health can be passed through from one generation to the next. And it's really significant, right? That's the kind of stuff that gets me out of bed. If we can help people have better home lives, and build better communities, then we're all going to benefit from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for the talk today, Gethin. I'm going to ask folks, if you have some questions for Gethin, if you want to put them in the chat, put them there. And then Gethin, maybe if you can field some of those questions from the chat while we go on to the next session. And if there's ones that we don't get to, or if you want to even send them to Jack or I, we can take that and we'll get them to Gethin and get them, answers and get information back to you. So again, thank you very much, Gethin. That was awesome. So thank you again, everybody. Appreciate you so much, and stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.